One, two. Check, check. Check, one, two. Hey, hey.
Testing, testing, 1, 2. Testing. Testing, 1, 2. Yeah. Hey, man.
Yes, sir.
How you doing?
Good to see you.
Thanks for coming. All right, everyone, let's begin to get your last cup of coffee and get your seat. Maria.
Are you talking while you're walking?
I am.
Talking?
So you're working, well, you still working home?
Well, I want to welcome everybody to our December Regional Housing Forum. Maybe I should begin by saying the election is over. I don't know if everybody stayed up late last night or if your candidate won, but it felt like a process that went well and that we can trust the outcome and move forward. After voting for Warnock 5 times, I thought enough is enough. So, thank you for being here. And I want to remind you that there's a number of people online still in their pajamas today, so I figure everybody that's here got up and got dressed and came downtown, so thank you for that. Let me just ask if there's any announcements for the good of the cause. If you would raise your hand and introduce yourself. One right over here.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Natalie Kaiser with House ATL, and I just want to share a little bit about House ATL and what we have going on right now. So we're a coalition, a cross-sector coalition. Anyone is welcome to join, focused on increasing affordable housing in Atlanta. And what I wanted to share is that we've launched a formal membership process. We used to be an informal whoever showed up, and we're formalizing our structure. So we have a membership application out. It's free to join. So I hope some of you will do that. And we're also asking members to make nominations to our board, and those nominations are due by the end of December. And we have several working groups that are very active. We're going to hear about policy today. We have a policy working group that Elizabeth is super involved in. So I hope some of you will, will join us, and we'll join one of our working groups, and come talk to me if you have any questions.
Thank you, Natalie. Any other announcements? You're not going to tell me what you're cooking for Christmas or anything, or Hanukkah celebrations. All right, we're here to talk about affordable housing. So again, thank you for being here. As you know, there are many stakeholders in the affordable housing sector. They're all represented here in the room. There's developers, there's nonprofit groups, There's financing partners, construction partners, and on and on. Cities and counties in our region are playing a larger role in affordable housing, and that's encouraging. We've been meeting here for a long time, so today we're really focused on some of the tools that we've created to move that agenda forward. So we're going to talk to Metro Atlanta governments who are ramping up the work on housing and how they're leveraging publicly owned land to build more. Now, we thought this would be really important because we often hear, that there's public land, hundreds of acres everywhere, and we wonder where it is and why we're not building on them and what are the challenges to doing that. So we're going to hear about some of that today. So we have two panels. The first panel includes local leaders involved in the Atlanta Regional Commission's recent initiative called Local Leaders Housing Action Committee. I'm particularly interested in that action part of the committee. So while they're just beginning to meet, that's what we're going to focus on. How does it work and what are they learning? ARC, if you were at the ARC regional breakfast this year, you heard Gwinnett County Chairwoman Nicole Love Hendrickson talk about the initiative she co-chaired. If you missed the event, you can find it on our website, ARC. The second panel will talk about the relatively new City of Atlanta Affordable Housing Strike Force. We'll talk the city leaders instrumental in that effort, as well as 3 organizational members of the strike force. Again, this is something we've heard quite a bit about, and the mayor really put this together to say, how can we collaborate, share best practices, move the agenda forward with all the different departments that are involved at the city. Same kind of question of how we move it forward in our region. So between the two panels, we're going to hear from our good friend Elizabeth Apley, attorney at law and public policy advocate on affordable housing sector. And again, we're in December. The legislature will begin meeting next month, and it's important for us to know what legislation is up this year, what we need to pay attention to, and if you choose, what to advocate for. So we look forward to these conversations. So I've already seated the panel, so let me introduce our Local Leaders Housing Action Committee. We have Patty Garrett, Mayor of the City of Atlanta. My mayor, I live in City of Decatur. I should know that since I live in Decatur, Patty. And Patty's always here, so my mayor, we did incorporate the City of Decatur in. Did we tell you about that? It's all part of it. Okay. We have Charlotta Harrell, Chair of the Henry County Board of Commissioners. So thank you for being here. Rob Garcia, former ARC board member and currently the regional president for Pinnacle Financial Partners. Rob has played every role in Cobb County and is a great representative to talk to today. And of course, our own Marissa Ghani from Housing Sustainability. Marissa, of course, has been part of the organizing of the Housing Forum through the years. She slipped out of ARC recently, but it didn't take long to bring her back. Marissa, thank you for being here. So let's just begin. What do we got? We've got everybody on the screen. So Marissa, thanks for joining us today. Can you tell us why ARC undertook this initiative and a little bit about the process?
Well, good morning, everybody. Is this on? Thanks for having me. It's so nice to see everybody's smiling faces. I've missed you all.
So Marissa's already forgot how to use the mic over here. So
I used to control this.
Yes, that's right.
I'm here as in my former role with the Atlanta Regional Commission, leading the housing work within that organization. In my new role, I work for Housing Sustainability Advisors, and we're helping local governments and developers build green affordable housing. So if anybody's interested in chatting about that, let me know. But as my role at ARC, we released the regional housing strategy, Metro Atlanta Housing Strategy in 2019. And within that strategy, it's amazing data. If you have not went and looked at the website. It's metroatlhousing.org, and it really is a useful tool. Besides for data, it also has over 150 different housing strategies. And we went at this as a menu of strategies that we wanted to offer to local governments to figure out where they can start in the process in addressing whatever their jurisdiction's housing challenges are. You know, what we have discovered from the data is that there are different challenges within each of the local governments. So, and everybody's at a different starting point. So we wanted to be able to help in whichever part of that process you were in. But one thing that we really felt was, what's ARC's responsibility in this process? And what are the things that we can do to help? And so one of the best things that we do is, one, provide data, but also provide a space for convening our local government officials. So we created, or I should say, we invited a number of elected officials who we knew were interested in addressing housing, but didn't really have the tools or were ahead. We wanted to mix the group between local governments like Decatur and other local governments like, you know, Henry County, to see, to be able to share experiences, to share best practices, to share experiences in addressing these issues. So we asked 12 different elected officials to join our group to go through a 1-year, 3-part process. The first part was really about building trust and understanding what was the purpose of these elected officials being at this table. We really didn't want it to be just about, you know, like Bill always says, you know, just kind of sucking the air out of the room and just talking about all the sorrows. Like, we wanted to make sure that it was about action. So we wanted to make sure that each of these local government officials knew that they had a role in this process and what specifically, as elected officials, they can do, right? We're not talking about, we were very, very clear that we didn't want to mix in roles that they didn't have responsibility over and didn't have control over. So we wanted to talk about the things that they had control over, whether it's finances, well, you know, in a way, regulations, and really what their role was this. So we create a purpose statement within the first 3 meetings. It was about trust building. It was about understanding. I think that was released within our press statement about this purpose statement, about why these elected officials are here. And then we went through a shared learning process. It was a 6-session shared learning process. We used our existing relationships with Enterprise, ANDP, ULI, the Federal Reserve, Bleakley Advisors, you know, all of the amazing Georgia Conservancy, Kronberg Associations, everybody who was is really a great advocate and a great organization within our housing space, to bring in their expertise for these local governments to hear what their role is in whatever the financing, zoning, development, partnership, collaboration, and how, and I'm not even joking, we specifically ended with each meeting saying, now, elected official, you have this information, what are you gonna come back with to your jurisdiction and say to them, or do within your jurisdiction with this piece of information? So that each piece was digestible in a way that we could talk about actions within those specific categories. And then our third part was really this shared commitment piece. Thankfully, we came to a number of shared commitments, whether it was increasing capacity within their local governments to address housing issues, which was I really wanted to get that one in there. Increasing resources, whether that's financial or through different either taxes or budget, but just understanding what those resources could be that can contribute to housing. And then they came up with their own specific jurisdictional commitments, which all are range very differently, whether it's creating a land trust, as Decatur is doing, or addressing homelessness, as Chair Harrell has identified. So really we knew that we could come up with some of those shared commitments, but we also knew that it had to be very specific to the jurisdictions and what they thought that they can do as elected officials within their role.
Good. You worked on that one, Marissa.
I actually did it.
Yeah. Well, you know, we've been talking about housing before you leave. We've been talking about housing at ARC all these years. We've had lots of different, you know, buckets of priorities and so forth. Why is this different? I mean, what I wrote down is building trust to move to action. Why is this different than other configurations?
I think one thing is that we realized is that we can give elected officials and we could give the local governments all the tools and the technical assistance and whatnot, but political will is such an important part of this that we were hoping that if we got a group of elected officials together who built this trust, they could be a good example for the rest of the region and for the rest of their elected officials who want to stand up and work on these issues.
Good, good. Rob, I'm going to turn to you, and I know from working in Cobb County through the food bank, almost every meeting I went to, Rob was there in some capacity. You haven't actually been a politician per se, had that, but you've worked with the chamber, you've worked with the commission, you've had many different roles at the bank. Why was this important for you? And you agreed to co-chair it.
Sure.
And what'd you learn?
Well, first of all, the opportunity to work closely with Chairwoman Hendrickson is a huge opportunity that most people wouldn't pass up. She's an amazing regional leader, and it's been such a joy to work closely with her and learn from her, and maybe even add a little bit. I mean, I'm the private sector representative of the group. And I think that's an important piece because we bring a different perspective to the conversation. I was been accused a time or two of being the wet blanket in a discussion, and I did have to remind the committee from time to time that, hey, I am in the room, you know, when we start talking about bankers and developers. But it was a very important perspective to really add to the discussion as we tried to accomplish the things that Marissa just perfectly illustrated. So it was a real great opportunity for us to really participate in, and not because I'm a member of the private sector. I've been involved in this region for many years. I've been on the board of the Atlanta Regional Commission for 15 years. I just rolled off a year or two ago. I was appointed by Sam Olens. That was 3 county commission chairs ago. So my term at the ARC spanned 3 county commission terms, commission chair terms in Cobb. And it was interesting because I was recently introduced as the voice of Cobb to the region. I was once the voice of Cobb to the region, but now I'm the voice of the region to Cobb. And I'm not sure if that was a compliment or not. We're still trying to decide that right now. But really, it is an important piece, an important connection, I think, for our community to the region. And I've been a resource, I feel, back to the Cobb community. So I think this is an area of tremendous import to everyone. And the other part, too, is private sector involvement really highlights what it's going to take to find solutions for this. It's really going to be a partnership between our county commission chairs and our mayors and our municipalities and the private sector. You know, we're not going to let developers solve this problem for us, right? And really, it's impossible for our mayors and county commissioners to do this on their own. It's a we issue, and I think that was an important part of my involvement with the committee. Yes? All right. What I learned from it is interesting. I think that was the other question that you were going to have. What I learned is that this crisis affects every one of us. And I use the word crisis because it is a crisis. I mean, we started with an affordable housing concern, affordable housing focus. This is a crisis. And if we look at what's happened, I mean, we're making national news on the lack of affordability in housing, the disappearance of affordable housing in this market, and that's not a good thing because it is a huge issue. And what I also learned, that it's an incredibly a difficult thing politically for our leaders, our elected officials to handle in their respective arenas. And it takes a tremendous amount of courage and so proud of their leaning into this effort. And what I also learned is the factors that affect each community are dramatically different. Yeah. What works in Dunwoody and the factors that affect affordable housing in Dunwoody are totally different than what affects Chairwoman Harrell in Henry County. And so it's not a place where we can come up with a strategy, everyone stack hands, break the huddle, and just go execute and create affordable housing. It is going to be, much like Marissa described, an opportunity to share best practices, opportunities, thoughts, partnership opportunities, and then from that, select what makes sense, bring back to your respective communities, and then begin the implementation process or the socialization process, if you will, because you're a long way from implementation when you bring this back. And so that's what I learned.
Good. And let me ask, because we're really asking you as a regional leader to what you just said. When you sit around with bankers, because you guys get together too,
Right.
what's the conversation for bankers about the challenge ahead? I mean, what are banks, how are they positioning? What do they need to see to make the loans in this area?
Well, it's interesting. There are really two schools of thought in my industry, and also I would kind of loop the developers into that a little bit. Number one, people see this as the business opportunity, right? There's actually three. The second one is, hey, I have to comply with this ESG movement. I have to comply with CRA requirements, and
I see
well, maybe
Patty
this is a
nodding
way
her
to do
head
it.
over here, so you're striking a.
Right. So they see this as a kind of a compulsory involvement to meet some sort of regulatory requirement. And then there's a group of people that really care about their community. They put their money where their mouth is, and I'm proud to say I'm part of an organization that is trying to put their money where their mouth is. We just had a great new recent relationship, invested heavily with ANDP and built a great new relationship there. We're trying to affect home ownership in a very direct and specific way. And there's a good segment of people in my industry that focus and trying to do the right thing. So it just kind of depends. It's you get a mixture of thoughts in the industry.
Okay, I'm not going to ask you to name names since everybody's not on board.
Sure.
But it's encouraging to hear that's the conversation
Right.
with the banking community. All right.
I think Marissa wanted to make a point.
Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that thank you to Rob and Chairwoman Hendrickson's leadership. Honestly, we could not have done it. I'm not. Chairwoman Hendrickson, I mean, she is a prime example of what has come out of this group. She has taken all of the work that we've done and created a new community and housing division within her county and is putting resources towards housing. So she's not here, but she does usually represent the group, and I just really wanted to thank her in this process as we continue this conversation.
Chairwoman Harrell, I'm going to move to both of you, but why don't you begin? Let's see.
Oh, it's live, that's why.
Good. Well, a similar question I think particularly there's a tendency to focus on Atlanta. The reason we made the Regional Housing Forum regional and based at ARC is we're not going to figure this out in one jurisdiction, to Rob's point. So tell us some about in your county and why you're involved and what you've learned so far.
Okay. Well, thank you for the opportunity. Good morning, everyone. I think that what this committee did for us was it brought leaders together in the region to compare notes, basically. And so what may work in the city of Decatur may not work in Atlanta or may not work in Henry County, but we can take a piece of the pie of what everyone is doing and make our own pie. And I think that that's the opportunity that created for myself and other leaders in the region.
Any big surprises?
No.
Okay.
No. What I learned is that we all have the same issue. Affordable housing is an issue not just in the metro Atlanta area, but in rural communities throughout Georgia. There are challenges, and how do you address those challenges? And so just being able to look at some of the successes that other counties have put in place was very helpful. To look at different housing models and ideas was very helpful. So a little bit about Henry County. Henry County, just a few years ago, was a rural county.
Yeah.
And so, we are moving into an area where there was never really an affordable housing crisis in Henry County, but now it is. We're one of the fastest growing counties even today in the U.S. So therefore, we have to address issues that we've never had to address before. we're having to address homelessness. That's something that when you say homelessness in Henry County, oh no, oh yes, oh yes. We have tent cities set up behind all of the Walmarts in Henry County. And so, but, you know, you have individuals that don't believe that we have a homeless problem. And so the biggest issue and challenge is, I think, educating people of the importance of what affordable or workforce housing does for your community. And in Henry County, a lot of the building or housing that we've had, our housing market, houses start at $400,000 and up. And that's not affordable for everyone.
Or
You
for
know.
many of us. Yeah.
And so therefore you've made it difficult for those individuals. And just to give you a prime example is that a lot of your workforce can't afford to live in the county in which they work and service. And I'm talking about county employees, I'm talking about teachers that are just starting out, I'm talking about our police officers and our firefighters. And so these individuals that are coming in that are part of that service industry for our community can't afford even to rent apartments in Henry County because they start at $2,100 a month. And so therefore, we are, to me, creating this message of you can work here, you can service us, but we don't want you living here. And so we've got to change that message, and we've got to change the mindset of leadership across the board. And so some of the things that I'm trying to do to address homelessness is, of course, bringing in partners. We have a lot of faith-based partners that I am working with to create a model similar to what Chairwoman Henderson created in Gwinnett County. And so I took some pastors up, and we went up and we took a tour of her homeless shelter in Gwinnett County. And now I have some pastors that are coming back wanting to model that, because it was a collaboration between the local government, a nonprofit, and the faith-based. And so that's one of the things that we're looking to do. The other thing is that we utilize neighborhood stabilization funds to purchase our first set of apartments that we have renovated. Actually went and took a tour of them, and they should be completed. The renovation should be completed by January. And so we're looking at, because Henry County, we do not have a housing authority, we are looking to partner with a nonprofit that can provide the wraparound services and that can manage this particular development. Because of course, local government, we're not looking to manage housing, but we're looking to make sure that there is accessibility for housing. And so we are looking to partner with nonprofits that can come in and manage this particular project for us, this particular property for us. And we're excited about that partnership. And so to me, one of the things that I've learned is that collaboration, partnerships are key to the success of what you do in any community. And we have to be open. We have to be open and have the mindset that affordable housing or workforce housing or whatever you want to call it is not a bad word. And so we have to make sure that we're educating everyone with regards to what that means for each and every community. You know, without affordable housing, you're dealing with, I mean, we have a lot of issues that coming into office, this is my first term in office. So coming into office, that we have a lot of challenges. Before COVID, well, since COVID, we've got about 2,000 children that are in our school system that are considered homeless. That means that they're living in extended stay hotels, they're sleeping on someone's couch, or maybe even sleeping in the car. So how do we address and support these families?
Let me ask, is it an aspiration of the committee to kind of create educational material, curriculum, PowerPoints? Have we done that yet?
So first of all, I didn't know the complete extent of, how the lessons have translated to practical solutions in your community. I absolutely loved hearing all of that, and I really appreciate that you've taken those steps forward. It's great to hear. I think that I know from what Sam has told me, this was kind of at the end of the discussion about how ARC was going to continue participating in this. We've talked about doing housing, having housing fellowships, basically, where ARC sponsors housing fellows for local jurisdictions. I'm not sure where that went, but I know that this is going to be a continued group. So we're hoping we're going to check in with our existing group every 6 months or so and offer our assistance through our normal technical assistance programs and however else that we can come out there and provide assistance. But also we're hoping that we get a new cohort of local jurisdictions who want to participate in these conversations and want to be a part of the solution.
Good. I'm going to move to Mayor Garrett of Decatur, but before I do that, there's a Ford Explorer GV5156P blocking folks trying to get in, I think, to deliver. So if that's anybody's car, please move it. Thank you.
Glad it's not my car.
It's your turn.
Okay. Well, again, thank you for asking me to be a part of this panel. It was really interesting because, as several of the panelists have said, we discovered that there were differences in the needs in our community, but we also discovered there were commonalities. For example, Chair Harrell just mentioned the issue with workforce housing. There is absolutely no way people who are serving in our restaurants and I would say most of our teachers and public employees could now move into the city of Decatur. We had a work session on Monday night about missing middle housing, and that's one of the strategies that we're looking at is how to reintroduce in our single-family zoning duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes. And as you can imagine, we've stirred a pot, and those who are here that live in Decatur know about that. But I think we found that what we're looking for solutions, for example, Decatur has only about 30% rental units in all of our housing stock. In many other communities, for example, when we were having these conversations as a part of this group with Dunwoody and Sandy Springs, they're like, oh my gosh, we don't need any more apartments. That is not going to help us meet any kind of need. And what every jurisdiction, I think, is wanting to be able to do without preemption is to figure out what is going to work best in that community. As a part of our work session, Dr. Dan Emmergluck from Georgia State said, not only is Decatur considered what is gentrified, Decatur is considered super gentrified, meaning that only those with the highest incomes could afford a home that goes on the market where, tear downs are the norm. And so could we, by letting the market forces work, for example, if a builder could build a quadplex or a duplex on that property and still have that margin of profit instead of $1 million plus home, that these are just little chunks that we might think that we want to move the needle. But that is a solution that we're looking at, that it became very apparent that that's not what every other city or county needs. So I think we had some difficult conversations as a part of this group, and that building trust period was important. And having the experts come and talk, and to have people like Rob also at the table, because I sometimes think, you know, my community thinks I have this magic wand that we can fix everything quickly, and we know that that's not the case, and it takes work. We have partnered with Atlanta Neighborhood Development for some cottages, a cottage court. We have 6 to help us. They're going to be made available for purchase, but the land will stay in the land trust. And that has become, you know, we finally found a partner that could, it's been in the works for about 6 or 7 years. The Development Authority bought the property, and we're now having those units being built, and they will be available by a lottery system to employees of the City Schools of Decatur, the Decatur government, as well as employees of the Housing Authority. But that's only 6 units. And that also is not without controversy. We had to take an extra tree down because the roots were growing into the sewer system. And Jacob Vallow lives in Decatur, and he knows about our trees too. And so there are competing interests, and we have to recognize that it is sometimes a political hot potato that you're passing back and forth. But I think the will of our commission at this point is that housing is a top priority. We have to be part of a regional solution, and we have to recognize that things that we can do are strategies that we can do. Some are going to mimic very much what is happening in other cities and counties, but others have to be unique for each jurisdiction.
That's a key message, isn't it? I'm going to open it up for questions. I have one from the virtual audience from Marla Cure. How can government realistically impact affordable housing issues? Isn't it too risky for most municipalities to invest in this way? Risky meaning when you go to that meeting, Mayor, and everybody's hollering at you, that feels kind of risky being up there. I'm trying to explain this. Or Chairman, have you had the same experience? And it really gets to what is the role of government, public sector, private sector, nonprofit sector. I think you talked some about it. You're trying to bring all those sectors together.
Well, I think it's a combination of everybody's responsibility. It's the responsibility of government in the sense, is it okay for people to live on the streets? I mean, then that creates other problems in your community. And so I think absolutely it is government's place to set the example and to step up to the plate. Some of the things that we can do from the government level is work on some of your ordinances to make sure that, you know, when you're trying to create this housing affordability, I think about a lot of the seniors that we have. You know, we have an aging population in Henry County. And so we were just awarded well, we were not awarded, but the developer, Georgia Communities, is building a 55 and older community. We have a lot of seniors that are looking to downsize from these big, humongous houses to smaller housing, but we don't have an inventory for that. So we are looking to do more of that aging in place type communities.
And is it, I think this is a leading question, but it's important to have all sectors at the table. Yeah, I mean, you need some cover. Be up there by yourself and everybody being fearful of what's coming. Let me just open it up and see if there's questions. Maria. And identify yourself, and the mic is coming.
Maria Supporta, a journalist, Supporta Report. I find it fascinating. I hear Carlotta saying she doesn't have a housing authority. I hear Mayor Garrett saying that they had to create a new land trust. We have a lot of mechanisms in our region, and are there ways that either ARC or this organization can help fill the void where some communities don't have the tools that like the city of Atlanta has in order to make a pathway for everyone to have a greater opportunity for housing affordability?
So tools that would cover the region, not just, Marissa?
I
you
mean,
want- Right, all right, good question.
that is certainly the hope, right? And so, I mean, through the Metro ATL housing strategy, like I said, there's a whole bunch of strategies on there for local governments to address, but also through our technical assistance and our funding, ARC provides either through LCI or our community development assistance program, work with local jurisdictions on their housing issues. And we've done a bunch in the last, obviously it's not enough. And hopefully something like a housing fellow can participate in a program where jurisdictions who want to add capacity to their local governments. But really, I mean, what's going to be the best thing is local governments adding housing capacity. Most of our local governments do not have staff that are directly staffed to address housing. They are either deal with grants from HUD or our community development and have to deal with parks and everything else. Most do not specifically say, we are working on housing issues. So I do think that's really, really a major piece of this puzzle if for a local jurisdiction that wants to address them. But yes, of course, ARC continues to work internally to figure out how we are helping to assist our local governments in doing so too.
So Rob, can you imagine a tool that ARC can create, more than just convening building trusts, that would help you in Cobb County?
Well, and that's, again, that's a big part. That's a big part of what we're trying to do here, is to create the exposure of the opportunities and those kind of resources that are in the community. So I think this is a step toward that process, and I see that continue to grow as this process continues. But if I can, while I have the mic, let me come back to that risk question, because I've kind of been pondering on it a little bit, and risk to a banker means a different thing, right? And when we talk about risk, naturally we talk about political risk. As I mentioned in my opening comments, I was just amazed at what an amazing politically charged issue this is. And then you heard our two elected officials literally talk about that very specific challenge. So yes, there is the risk, and I am so thankful for their courage and boldness, because that's what it's going to take to deal with that risk. But let's talk about a different kind of risk. Let's talk about the real risk of loss. It takes a certain boldness to do creative things in this arena. There's some examples where some counties are literally in part of the capital stack with the developers, and not only participating on the investment side, but participating on the return side from a preferred return standpoint, and literally being that creative to create the financial capability for these kind of projects to exist. So as opposed to standing on the sidelines and pointing at what we can do and build it there and all of that kind of stuff, they're literally part of the process. And I tell you, that's the kind of boldness and that's the kind of open-mindedness that it's going to take to deal with all the risks involved. And my bet is the return on investment is going to be weighed and it's going to be judged much greater than just whatever they get from a return standpoint. It's going to be weighed on what the impact to the community is. And you're seeing several projects like that across our footprint. That's encouraging. That's exciting.
If I could comment a little bit about, roles that organizations can play and roles that government can play. I think one of the things, and maybe this is something ARC could help facilitate, is one of the most successful things I think that we did was to have an affordable housing summit at the end of 2018. It was facilitated by someone who is standing in front of you.
I remember that one.
As a
200
result-
people on a
yeah,
Saturday.
As a result of that, we then appointed an affordable housing task force that worked for about 6 to 8 months and came up with a report that identified 5 specific areas, as well as things that could be done to achieve the goals of that. I think that there might be a role for facilitation for something like that, because as most of you know, Decatur does a lot of planning, and but we stand on those plans, and so we can take some of the political bullets by saying, this is in our affordable housing task force, this is in our strategic plan, and so this is the way we're moving forward. And so if counties or other cities that may not have the staff or the resources, but could hold something that would bring, if you have the buy-in and it.
So you're building the case, right?
You're building it
And you're involving the
educating
citizens.
at the same time.
Yeah.
And so maybe that would be a role in something that, to Maria's point as well.
Okay, good. Other questions in the back?
Hey everyone, Will Johnston with MicroLife. Chairman Harrell, when you've talked about education, one of the biggest issues that I've had at speaking to the community is they also don't necessarily really want to hear what we have to say. And so, actually this is for the whole panel, and I know everyone in the room, one of the biggest things, we believe in education, we believe in showing the numbers and showing that your property value is not going to go down if a duplex is built or a fourplex is built next to you. So I'm wondering, how are you addressing education? What type of ways? And I know on the ARC side, we are rolling out so many different types of aspects of just trying to communicate, but it is boots on the ground talking. So I'm just wondering what you are doing or initiating to really educate the community on why we need housing choice.
Okay, so I think that sometimes it's, we are working with a lot of our local nonprofits and a lot of our faith-based. Georgia in general is when it comes to faith-based organizations, people go to church. They listen to their pastor. So I think that it's very important to have that partnership and collaboration. But also I think that you have to put the human side with it. You have to be able to say, hey, listen, I've got a police officer here that makes $48,000 a year. Would you not want this person living in your community? Could we not build some affordable housing? And when I say, because it's not just about building apartments and housing people in apartments, but we also want to make sure that people become homeowners. So you've got to have those wraparound services that, you may start in this apartment here, but we're going to make sure that you have the financial literacy to be able to get yourself to the next step to be able to purchase a home. But then we've got to have those starter homes. My first home I bought was a starter home, so we've gotten away from those starter homes, and it's like we want to build all of the big gated communities, and we send the message, we want to keep you out, but you can police here, you can fight fires here, you can serve me at the local restaurant, but I don't want you living here. That's the wrong message that we're sending. And so, I think that sometimes you have to humanize when you talk about the education piece of it. So, will I have this police officer sitting up here next to me? Or will I have a local county worker that answers the phone at the front desk sitting up here with me? So I think that we can do a better job in helping those that are making the decision and those that are within our communities understand it's okay to have a $200,000 house in your community. Because guess what? That police officer or that firefighter or that nurse or that teacher might be the person that's living in your community. So I think that I think it's about the messaging, I think it's about branding, and I think it's about advocacy. And we all have to do this together.
One thing that I do want to add is, that you touched on, is the home ownership piece does seem to be the most effective message when we're talking about affordability, whether it's affordability of starter homes. But as if you bring in that conversation around home ownership and the technical needs of financial assistance and, to get to there. I think those are the most effective messages that we've seen.
So a key question for us as we're wrapping up this part of the presentation is, how do we get more regional leaders involved in the community? How do we get more bankers to come to the meetings, or more regional leaders, or more ministers that would come? I am going to assign you writing sermons, Rob, for so we can pass that out to all the ministers and rabbis. And
We'll do that. Well, piggybacking on what Chairwoman Harrell said is the education process. And let me be the business guy in the room again. The business community has to play a bigger role in this thing. And I tell my friends in the business community all the time, we can't always be the guys that get brought along. Okay, I'm very involved in economic development in our community, and chair the Economic Development Corporation of Cobb for many years, and it just always blows me away when I see this mentality that economic development is really divorced from affordable housing. That's a different issue. And we've got to make sure that the business community understands that it's not a different issue. I just spoke with somebody who's doing a strategic plan for the Cobb Chamber of Commerce, and my whole discussion was how affordable housing was the economic
so it's how
development.
you frame it. It's how you ask the
Absolutely.
question.
And it's a part of the education process, as Chairwoman Harrell said. I mean, you've got to get these people to think. And how do you do that? Well, go to the largest shopping center in your respective area and ask them how important it is for labor force during Christmas time, for all of their tenants, how important that is for their success, and how important, and how does that translate into rentable income. And every one of you will see a direct link. Go to a restaurant and see 1/3 of the restaurant completely blocked off, and you're waiting 30 minutes to get in and 40 minutes for your food because there's not enough workers.
Yeah.
And affordable housing is an economic development issue, and until we're more effective in showing that direct link to the business community, we're going to continue to be brought along the process. So I think that's a big part of it, and that's what it's going to take to get people to lead in this effort. You used a phrase a while ago, we've got to give our elected officials cover. This is a tough conversation. I can only imagine how tough that conversation was at Patty's Forum that she talked about, because it is emotional. But the business community's got to step up and be that cover for our elected officials.
And let me ask, I'm going to come back to you, Marissa, but Mayor Garrett, we have in Decatur a good cross-section. Do you have to call them up and invite them? Do you have to call them 3 times? Do you have to feed them? I mean, what do you do to get that cross-section there?
Feeding them always helps.
Okay.
I have to say,
Yeah, I
that
thought so.
always helps. Food brings people in. And but you do have to be persistent, I think, and ask. And that was one of the things with our Affordable Housing Task Force, is we brought people in from every sector. We had the affordable housing activists, certainly.
And you
at the
did
table.
that by personally inviting them in,
Right.
not just sending out a notice.
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely. We had clergy as a part of it. We had the development community as a part of it. We had affordable housing specialists, people who work in that space. And so it was so that there was we wanted it to be based in reality. One of the biggest pushbacks that I get, and Rob can understand this, is like, the developers are the bad guys over here. And so, but we can solve all the problems without them. That's not grounded in reality. And so we wanted to make sure we had this cross-section of people, that it was facilitated. We invested staff time, but I think feeding them is important. Having the data there to show, here's what it takes to live in your county, here's what your public servants make, here's what they can afford for a down payment, and here's the gap. And so that sort of education and data and, maybe ARC can help with the data. Maybe they can help with the mapping of where people live and how many people come into your county or your city and leave at the end of the day. So to develop that, and people don't people don't always want the facts, and I think, but you can massage them in a way and feed them and have some table discussions and bring at least an acknowledgement and a realization that there is that problem and that we can work better together and to solve it and not ignore it. Because if you ignore it, it just gets worse and more difficult.
So to finish this up, Marissa, what's the future of this group at ARC? What do you think?
First of all, externally, I think the Housing Task Force is number one step. But internally, you need to have that staff person who's going to take those and implement it and do all of the rest of it.
That was part of our Affordable Housing Task Force. We had a fellow and now is a permanent position, so.
Because ARC could come in and facilitate and offer data, but if there's nobody there to think about it and implement it and move it forward, it falls where it falls. So again, internal.
So Chairwoman, that's going to be an issue because it may take another person or a reassignment. You've got to justify that in your budget.
I mean, and I do have a person that oversees our community development, and so she oversees all of our NSP funds, all of our CDBG funds, and so she kind of spearheads all of that. So we do have someone in place that could take that leadership role. I think that what we have to also consider, and this is where we need help from the public, is that it's only so much that we can do on a local level, but we need help on the state and federal level. And
Well, what a good segue to our next session. Huh?
yeah, I mean, I know it is, but let me tell you,
I saw you and Elizabeth talking before. Well, you guys got this plan?
we have to have help on the state and federal level. A lot of the regulations and policies that are in place that are set by HUD makes it very restrictive for us as local governments to be able to get in that place where we can provide the necessary affordable housing. And just let me give this one example. In Henry County, we do not have public transit. So, I mean, the closest that we have to public transit is that you drive to the park and ride, you get on the Greta bus, and you go into Atlanta, okay? So, parts of Henry County, we still have parts of Henry County that are rural. So when we invite developers, affordable housing developers in, and they do the scoring for our area, it knocks us out because the closest grocery store is not going to be within a mile and a half, you know, or we don't have the public transit where we have bus stops that are going to pick people up along the way. So we've got to have the state and the federal look at their regulations to make it a little bit easier for us to be able to do our job as local officials to be able to bring that affordable housing to our communities.
Which is a great example that each municipality, each county, each region is unique in how they approach it. This is what, Marissa, you wanted?
I'm gonna end it for you.
Okay.
I hope
Quickly.
a group of new elected officials step up and join a new local leadership action committee. One, I hope ARC convenes a group similar to LAHAC for business community, which Buckhead is currently doing some really interesting things with how businesses can participate in housing. And I hope that the Metro Atlanta Chamber steps up and starts talking more about housing.
Hear, hear. Let me please give our panel a hand. Now let me just, before we move on, some things I heard, because it's always important we hear different things. Rob, or maybe it was Mayor Garrett, said we're stirring the pot, right? Rob framed it as a crisis that we're in. Stirring the pot causes anxiety, causes people to be nervous about what's happening. Oftentimes it feels like things are getting away from them. So I heard that one of the most important things is building trust, and building trust to move to action. That is defining roles, whether it's federal, state, or local. That we've got to educate our citizens and other policymakers. We may need to change the way we deliver the message. That collaboration and partnerships are key. We've got to have everybody at the table. And that it takes courage and boldness, particularly by our policymakers, to make this happen. This is hard work. That this is a moral issue, as Chairman Harrell said, this is the right thing to do for our citizens. And that we have to support our policymakers. We may not always agree with them, but we're putting them in the line of fire. So we need to show up and be there for them. Please thank this panel again. Good job. Thanks, Rob. Appreciate it. Okay. Well, we set you up very well. We've invited Elizabeth Apley. You can see, come on up. Elizabeth is our go-to person in the region to talk about public policy. And we've already talked about the state has a role, the county has a role, local municipalities have a role. So I've asked Elizabeth to take about 15 minutes and give us kind of top line, what are our priorities as we look at the year ahead. And I'd like for her to begin with, why is it important to be at the state? Elizabeth, thank you for being here.
Good morning. Thank you all for being here. I see friends and colleagues and leaders in the audience, and it's critical that we face this together. If you voted yesterday, or last week, or last month, thank you. Thank you. Voting matters. And we have now completed, as Bill said, these elections. We have the elected officials that we will be facing in this Georgia General Assembly. And so having voted, the next step is to begin to build or continue the relationship with those people we've elected, whether you voted for them or not. These are the people who will be deciding and allocating the money and the policies and the resources that will make the difference as we try to move forward. And so I have the privilege and the challenge of representing Enterprise Community Partners, the Georgia Advancing Communities Together, Georgia Supportive Housing Association, 9 to 5, and Presbyterians for a Better Georgia at the Capitol on housing and homelessness. But without your advocacy, we can't make the change that we want to see. When I go to get my hair cut, my beautician has a little sign on her mirror that says, "I'm a beautician, not a magician." And you know, while my hopes are high, so I'm a technician, not a magician. Without your voices, we can't make the change you want to see. So our message is that housing is critical, it's foundational for thriving communities. It's not about individual wealth. It's about whether we want to have the communities that will prosper and support and advance us all. By the way, these slides are available to all of you. They're online. You've already received them in an email. I know they're dense. Bill swore to me to make it simple, but that's not my forte. So, Georgia law has provided for over 30 years that it is the state's policy to provide decent, safe, and affordable housing to all segments of the population of this state. We'd probably have to grade them an F on meeting that policy. We have a dire and growing shortage of affordable housing that had existed because of structural issues far before the pandemic, but it's getting worse now. We have a high proportion of renters. Many are economically disadvantaged. but Georgia is an outlier in providing very few tenant protections of any kind. And the end result of affordable housing, as you heard from this last panel, is homelessness. We have a humanitarian crisis when you have tent cities behind Walmarts in Henry County and across Georgia. And we have a system that cycles people through the criminal justice system, through the emergency rooms, through the state hospitals at a very high cost and without benefiting them at all, or us at all. At the same time, affordable housing has become a commodity. Large corporate investors are coming in and buying up huge numbers of properties, especially in Georgia, and they will say in their written materials, because we have few tenant protections, and that makes home buying out of reach for many home buyers, and they also become what we know to be predatory landlords. So this is a question Bill asked me to address. Why is state advocacy necessary? And Chairman Harrell laid it out perfectly. It is necessary because much of what we can and can't do is defined by state law. I'm not putting all of this in terms of the word preemption, but that is the reality. Some of these laws actually bar expressly cities and counties from taking forward-thinking, needed steps. We know that rent control is prohibited for cities to take action on, or counties. And it's particularly frustrating for us here in Atlanta because there's tremendous political will. The mayor, the city council, many in our region want to do the right thing. And you see just examples of this here. And yet state law says renters may not withhold rent when a landlord fails to make repairs. The State Fair Housing Act says we can't have source of income protection because it wasn't written into the State Fair Housing Act to begin with. And so voucher holders who are the privileged minority that get those vouchers can't use them anywhere. We know that cities are prohibited from creating a registry of multifamily rentals, which is essential to holding them accountable for the standards and habitability that people need. They can't activate code enforcement based on what's happening inside a unit, that they're limited to what they can see from the street. State law controls what taxes communities can raise. If they want to create a housing trust fund, they can create it, but the funds that they can generate to fund that trust fund are defined and limited by state law. And finally, restrictions have recently been enacted in Georgia that make it even harder for communities to rezone properties to increase density. And that's not a comprehensive list. So I'm going to focus on tenant protections, on homelessness, and on workforce housing as a way to move forward this General Assembly. We have some of the highest eviction rates and eviction filing rates of any state in the country, and that's been true for decades. We have a reality that once an eviction is filed, regardless of what the outcome of that eviction proceeding is, that will follow that tenant for decades and make it impossible for them to rent that next home. We know that the face of eviction in Georgia is black women with children who are disproportionately at risk for eviction, even controlling for socioeconomic factors. And so what legislation that we have proposed now, this will be the fourth year, to do is a very simple step that the lawyers who work in this field, the advocates tell me, would be critically important. It would allow Georgia to join the 40 other states who are doing this, including our neighbors here in the Southeast, to say that once the landlord gives the notice to depart, it has to be in writing. They can't immediately go to court and file for that eviction. We're saying that there must be a 7-day period within which the tenant can cure the non-payment of rent or other defect of performance. Research done and published this summer reviewing 100 million eviction filings across the country found that a right to cure of even a few days duration reduces eviction filings by over 43%. Evictions cost communities over $11,262 in Georgia for every eviction that occurs. We know that it stops children from being able to succeed in school. It prevents parents from being able to work. A 16-year study showed that evictions during pregnancy result in low birth weight, preterm birth, multi-generational harms, and we're paying too high a price. We need to move forward with a proposal that is a win-win. Tenants get a little extra time to make good on their obligation to pay their rent, and landlords get paid without having to go to court. Turning to the unhoused, we have faced in this last legislative session 2 bills in the House and the Senate that have kept us on the defense in addressing the challenges of unhoused Georgians. A Texas billionaire has invested in the creation of a nonprofit that has introduced legislation across the country that promotes a strategy to hide these people in tents that we see on the street rather than to house them. And these bills propose to divert all the money that we are now spending, and in Georgia, believe me, it is not much. I think the commissioner of the Department of Community Affairs is quoted as saying not one dime. It's a little better than that. Instead of investing in housing first, in permanent supportive housing, the evidence-based models that we know work to help people leave homelessness, they propose to divert that funding away from those strategies and into encampments, parking lots with a fence around them, porta potties, and potable water. So this is not an exit from homelessness. It's just getting them, instead of tenting across the street from the Capitol or under underpasses or on Cortlandt Avenue as you came to this meeting, they would be hiding them somewhere where we're not seeing them. So we fought these bills, we stopped them from moving forward, we ended up with a study committee, and all of us together, and many of you in this room testified, and your organizations testified against these bills. We made a very strong case, hearing from providers and advocates and people with lived experience. And so the final report of the study committee, adapted on Wednesday evening before Thanksgiving, proposed a number of positive things and stepped entirely away from the Cicero model of this legislation that has passed in 2 states around the country, away from criminalization and in favor of increasing funding for the strategies that work to end homelessness. It's notable, however, that the Republican leadership on the committee voted to strike 18 of the 26 recommendations and did not vote in favor of the report and recommendations when their motion failed. So we're going to face challenges that persist even into the next legislative session on this issue. We're also working with the Behavioral Health Reform and Innovation Commission specifically on this issue of criminal diversion, and on their obligation to include in their report, which is due before the end of December, recommendations on best practices and funding sources to address homelessness. So, more affordable housing. We get to possibly the good news in all of this. Yesterday at the biennial, where all the legislators come and meet together before the beginning of the session, the Chamber of Commerce, the Georgia Chamber of Commerce, announced that one of their top 3 priorities for this legislative session is workforce housing. So that, good news, they have a lot of power at the Capitol. At the same time, you all probably have been following along with us this Build to Rent Study Committee introduced under the guise of affordable housing, but in reality being promoted by the same actors who introduced legislation last year to preempt or to prevent cities and counties from regulating the landlord-tenant relationship in any way or the rental relationship in any way, and also for the purpose of requiring that counties and cities allow for the construction of single-family developments intended for rental purposes. We know that this is being brought at the instance of real estate investment trusts and large institutional investors who commodify affordable housing. That report did not include recommendations. Every single witnesses over 4 long days of testimony said we have an affordable housing crisis in Georgia. Their recommendations for how to solve it were varied. The report is fairly balanced, but we know what lies ahead from this group. So the question is, as these forces purport to be addressing affordable housing, what will that look like? And our advocacy is going to be essential in defining what that is. Who does workforce housing serve? And what does that service look like? Is it going to preempt or limit cities and counties in exercising zoning authority? Is it going to address the challenges of minimum lot sizes or residential density? Is it going to provide for the investment of more state funding into affordable housing? And what will be incentives that will be applied, and how will they benefit not only working families, but also more vulnerable and lower income families? So just to reiterate, our policy priorities for 2023 focus on the tenant protections, the notice and right to cure, but we're also faced, as we are every year, with the proliferation of wrong-headed anti-tenant measures that we have to fight and stop. And we're also concerned with our partners about source of income protection, expungement of eviction records, and other critical issues. We'll be continuing to fight the legislation to criminalize homelessness, to divert funding away from proven best practices and into these encampments, and work for stronger policies and more resources for supportive housing. And finally, to work as hard as we possibly can to strengthen those policies and the allocation of resources that support the creation of affordable housing. It's critical as we engage in this advocacy that we follow the money. This is where Georgia shows what it really cares about. We have a $6.6 billion surplus in the state budget this year. The governor is looking for one-time expenditures. You heard yesterday he's already committed a $1 billion give back to taxpayers, another $1 billion give back in tax rebates to homeowners, which of course does nothing about housing affordability. It does nothing about the rising mortgage interest rates. It does nothing about homelessness. But he announced yesterday he's looking for more tax givebacks. But he has the option, and we've been advocating with his office for investment in the Housing Trust Fund for the Homeless, which has the power to address the full gamut of housing affordability issues. They have a non-lapsing provision, so the governor can make a one-time allocation of substantial resources that the Department of Community Affairs would have the power to allocate over time. We're going to advocate, obviously, for increased funding for affordable housing development and rehabilitation, homeless prevention services, increasing funding to the Georgia Housing Voucher Program. As you know, this is the program the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities created in response to their obligations under the settlement agreement with the Department of Justice to house 9,000 people who are homeless with severe and persistent mental illness, who are cycling through the criminal justice system, our emergency rooms and hospitals. At present, we're only housing 1,900 of those people. So we need to get them more resources to get the job done. And finally, as we see the suspension of acceptance of new applications for the federal emergency rental assistance program that we had during the pandemic, we know that this is a critical piece to keep families stably housed, that we need to advocate for the creation of a permanent emergency rental assistance program and for eviction strategies that are proven to be effective, such as the funding of representation for people facing eviction. So the next steps, it's something we have to all do. Identify who your state senator and representative are. You can go to openstates.org is the simplest way to do that, and put in your home address. Meet with them before the session. Let them know what your housing priorities are. They may be different from the ones I've mentioned. Start to build that relationship and continue to communicate with them during the session. You'll be receiving advocacy alerts from all of the groups that I represent and others, the United Way and others also share advocacy alerts. Please take action when you're asked, because hearing from their constituents is critically important to what happens at the Capitol. And please join us for Georgia Act's Housing Day at the Capitol. We plan for it to be in person this year on February 22nd, and you'll be receiving more information about the details for that. So thank you for your time and attention and the promise of future advocacy.
I'm going to have one question that we got from Michael Dobbins. Is there legislation that would bar home rule cities from regulating land use and zoning?
Well, the legislation introduced in 2022 by the Real Estate Investment Trust did propose to do just that, to prohibit any regulation, and it was particularly aimed at zoning that would affect the ability to build single-family rental property. The legislation was couched much more broadly, but GMA, the Georgia Municipal Association, and the Association of County Commissioners of Georgia strongly opposed that preemption. These investors are targeting Georgia, and you can see it in their written materials because of the absence of tenant protections in this state. It's not a coincidence that four corporations own 27,000 single-family homes in Atlanta. So we would like to see changes in zoning. We would like to see the opportunity for more density and the opportunity to reduce lot sizes. But this strategy of preemption is one that does not serve us necessarily.
Thank you. Please thank Elizabeth again. Good job. Excellent job. Let me ask the panel to come on up and I'll get you introduced. Let me say again that everything we're presenting can be found on our website, as the forum is also recorded. So we have probably more people coming after the meeting, going to our website, watching this than actually showed up today. So very important with what Elizabeth said and the issues that we're facing. It's really up to us to be there. All right, we're going to move to our next panel, and let me introduce it this way. Mayor Andre Dickens has followed Mayor Bottoms with an affordable housing commitment of his own. He's pledged to build or preserve 20,000 affordable units by 2030. To date, according to the city tracker, that tally is currently at 5,693. So we're making progress. We still have a way to go. And one of the things that we're trying to figure out how to measure is, what are we losing in the meantime? Are we making any progress? So we would be looking at both of those. In May of this year, Mayor Dickens activated the city's affordable housing strike force to break down barriers to the development and preservation of affordable homes in Atlanta. So that's what we're going to learn about today. And the question is that a model that we could use around the region? I think the commitment, and I'll ask the panel to talk about this, by the mayor is, how do we collaborate better? How do we get things done? How do they not bog down into the different silos? So that really is the commitment the mayor's made. All the folks today are on that strike force. So let me introduce Joshua Humphreys from the mayor's office. Thank you, Josh, for being here. Terry Lee from Atlanta Housing, who's been here many times. Terry reminded me she's had 5 different positions, from housing czar to planning czar to, I can't remember them all. Terry's still standing, and she's here with us. Jacob Vello from MARTA, and we often, as we look at MARTA and as they start developing their land around MARTA stations, we want to hear more about that. And Daniel Drake from Atlanta Public Schools. And again, Atlanta Public Schools has land just like the city has. But it's very important, as we learn there's hundreds of acres out there. It's not as easy as that's good to build on, or that HUD can release it, or who owns it and who's got to be in the deal. So more complicated than we would like it to be. We're going to learn about some of that today. So let me start with you, Josh. What can you tell us about the strike force? And what I understand is, what I just said, the strike force is really there to get greater collaboration. How are we doing, Josh?
Sure. Can y'all hear me in this?
Yeah.
Okay. Hey, everyone. So, I think that to step back a little bit, and I'll get to your question here in a second around the strike force. Housing affordability challenge is obviously one of the most pressing challenges facing the region. That's why all of us are in the room today, and it's been a long-standing and growing challenge for us. A lot of good work has been done over the years. When we were doing a prep call on this, Bill reminded us about some work done around APS land, and I think there's been talk for a long time about public land and how public land could play a role in addressing this work. I think the reason that public land, at least in my mind, is such an interesting element of this is that when you're looking at a challenge as daunting as the affordable housing crisis that we have, to look at underutilized resources or uncommon areas that you might be able to tap into and leverage in order to address such a pressing need. Public land in Atlanta, anybody who lives here or spends any time driving around here, you'll drive and you'll see a vacant lot. You're like, oh, that's an interesting lot. You could think we could build something on that, and then you realize, oh, well, that's owned by MARTA, or that's owned by the city, or it's owned by the housing authority. And so I think that because of that, it creates a real visceral experience of what could be done and how that land might be used for the work. So as the mayor took office and really started moving forward in an action-oriented way, said, hey, we've done a lot of work, we've thought about this public land, we've got some land we think we can move forward on. We need to get everyone together, the heads of all of the different agencies, and really think about how we can best work together, right? Because I know it's, whether we're talking about the city of Atlanta or anywhere around the region, there's all these different public agencies and authorities, and we all own different pieces and elements of the land. You start looking on a map together and you realize that the MARTA's got land right next to APS land, right next to the housing authority land, next to the city land. Together, we could do something really special. But the silos of the different ownership and agencies have oftentimes been part of what's gotten in the way of the work. And so getting everyone together and saying, like, let's move with a sense of urgency, and let's ask the kinds of questions of, does this APS site, maybe it actually makes more sense for housing long term, but the housing authority site might make more sense for a school. And if we're all in the room together, we can start thinking about what the best outcome is for our neighborhoods and around housing. And so I think the first part was getting everyone in the room together under the mayor's leadership and saying, let's move forward with a sense of urgency. The second piece with housing, and why I think that having both the senior leaders of all these different agencies together is important, but then having staff really down the line that get into the work is because public land is really complicated, right? oftentimes you'll start digging in, we'll be looking into a parcel and be like, I don't know why we own this thing. And then you realize, oh, in like 1902, the city acquired it for XYZ reason, and it's got a brownfield on it, and there's 4 different parcels, and it's all split up between different agencies. And so it's complicated to actually move it forward. So a lot of the work of the strike force, I think, is behind the scenes work of saying, hey, this is a site we think makes a lot of sense for housing. The market is there. It could help address this, but we've got to go line up a lot of pieces in order to really activate.
So how's it work? Do you call Jacob up and say, we got some land beside your land, let's do a deal?
Basically, I think I've been on the phone with each of these people this week about different public land parcels, right? And that's a regular occurrence.
So that's
like
a regular
working together,
communication
right?
you have.
Yeah, and so it's, but because I think that's the type of work. I mean, for so long, so for so long, this land hasn't been developed for housing or thought of as housing. So working through the details on that, I think it is a fundamental part of this work. And saying, okay, we want to build housing, but we've got to go do title work and due diligence and look at environmental concerns and figure out who actually owns it. Because oftentimes that's a very confusing part of publicly owned land. And so that type of everyday collaboration across the board is something we've been building for several years. I think we're really in a position now to move with action and have a mayor who wants to move with action that allows a lot of this to continue moving forward.
Excellent. Terry, let me get an update from Atlanta Housing, which is the position you have now. We're often referred to Atlanta Housing, and where are we?
Absolutely. First, if I could just take a point of privilege to acknowledge Councilmember Matt Westmoreland, who's in the room. Councilmember Westmoreland has been a huge champion and friend to affordable housing in the city, and was quite honestly the catalyst to moving forward with a $100 million bond issue in December of 2021. And so I just would be remiss if I didn't say thank you and acknowledge his presence.
Well, let's all thank
So I have the opportunity to have seen this on several different vantage points. And now that I'm at the Housing Authority, I will tell you, when I walked in the door on December 10th, 2020, the first question I said was, how much land do we have? How much land do we have? And then the second question was, and actually, to be honest with you, I asked them this question November 10th, 2020, when we did they did a retreat for me to bring me up to speed. How much land do we have? How fast are we moving? And who are we helping? Right? Because those are critical points. And so I want to give you a couple of numbers, and these are approximates. I want to give you approximately 827. I want to give you approximately 403. I want to give you approximately 84, and then I want to talk about approximately 340 acres. So let me define that for you. So if you go to the tax records right now and put in Atlanta Housing Authority, you will pull up about 827 acres that belong to Atlanta Housing Authority that are listed under our name. Now, what's interesting to note is about 353 of those acres are ground leases. Because when we do development, especially from a rental standpoint, we actually hold a ground lease versus transferring the land. And so it's about 353 acres of that 403 that would be towards ground leases. The second number I gave, 403 of the 827. The second number I gave you was 84. And 84, those are parcels that we're currently under a litigation with. I don't want to get into discussion about that, but those are parcels that we're working, and under this mayor's leadership, will solve pretty quickly to move forward with that. But 340. So we've identified 340 acres of land, and that represents about 41% of the land that's under Atlanta Housing that we could move forward with development activity. And so to do so, we decided to define those land parcels in 3 tiers, tier 1, 2, and 3. Tier 1 would be land that has a master developer already selected, and we're ready to move forward with some level of development activity. Tier 2 would be land that's in a planning process, and then Tier 3 is where we need to do some additional due diligence. As Josh stated, there may be land that's quite honestly not suitable for housing, but may be suitable for some level of economic development or community development aspect that we have to prove a public benefit for in order to move forward with. So when we think about the acreage under Tier 1, of the 340 acres, about 52% of our acreage is under Tier 1. And so let me give that as projects, right? So recently our board approved the redevelopment of the Civic Center. Civic Center will produce about 1,300 units, of which 40% of those units will be affordable. Our board also approved the redevelopment of Bowen Homes. We selected a master development for the Bowen Homes site. That's a 74-acre site. Of that 74-acre site, we're proposing to produce about 2,000 units, of which 44% will be affordable. Of that 44% affordable, we're going to have a component for homeownership. We also talk about Inglewood. Inglewood is a development that the Housing Authority has been working on since 2015. We're currently at the point where we're able to move forward with some level of infrastructure development to move that project forward. I'm looking at John, and another project we have will be some scatter site parcels over in Vine City that we're hoping to move forward within this next year. So that just gives you an idea of the activity that we're looking to move forward with. Next year, we have the potential to do possibly close to 74 acres, put them out on the street for some level of redevelopment activity or planning activity. A huge site would be Thomasville. Many of you are aware of the mayor's yeoman efforts to help relocate the families at Forest Cove. Well, we have a 36-acre site across the street. And so the question is, as you redevelop and quite honestly, stabilize that community differently, how can we leverage the land that Atlanta Housing has, as well as the city of Atlanta and even APS and MARTA, to really make that community a sustainable community? And planning with the community, not planning on top of the community. I think that's important to say as well. Thank you. I hope that's recorded. And then last but not least, an example of Tier 3 will be projects that are in due diligence. A great example of that would be Bankhead. And I say Bankhead because Bankhead is literally down the street from Bowen Homes, off of down Lee Hollowell. But we all know that that property really borders Cobb County and is mostly an industrial area. And so, while Cobb is building up its side for housing, and this side of the Chattahoochee allows for it, the question is whether or not we can build on the Atlanta side of the Chattahoochee. And so, so those are some things that we'll be looking at. But if you don't leave with anything else, leave with the fact that we have put 178 acres of land into play. And 178 acres of land will provide housing opportunities, and more importantly, affordable housing opportunities for folks here within the city of Atlanta, because we project that of that 178 acres, we'll have about 40 to 45% affordability on those parcels. Thank you.
So Terry, great report. I noticed you used the word hope to 3 times. So should I feel hopeful?
I pray every day. But I think, when you talk about the time we're in, and we've seen a lot over the years, and Bill, we've seen a lot.
Yeah.
My very first time coming here, quite honestly, would have been when we were at the food bank. And that was when Mayor Shirley Franklin was a mayor, and we were presenting on the implementation strategy for great housing in great neighborhoods. And at that time, we talked about the hope, and we talked about the promise, and we talked about the need. What I have seen escalate over different administrations, different time, different years, and quite honestly, as we've received different demands from the community, is the sense of urgency. And so if I've ever been hopeful in the city of Atlanta, I'm hopeful now that all the stars have aligned, and that we not only have grace and hope, but we have political will, political urgency, and the capacity to get it done.
All right. We recorded that too, Terry, so we got you on the record.
I'm going to put it on my LinkedIn.
Jacob, we often are reading about transient-oriented housing, and we're already starting to see some of that happen. What can you tell us?
That's great. Well, I appreciate being here and with everyone here on the panel. And I will also give a shout out to CM Westmoreland. He has sat in my office looking at financial models of how these deals are put together, and as everyone has talked about, they're super complex.
We should get Matt to set up front occasionally, shouldn't we? Yeah. I mean, he's always back
maybe
there.
Maybe that's the magic, is he's not. So, but now blessed to be in this position. I saw my former colleague Amanda Rhines here. Shout out to Amanda, because she really started the affordable housing effort at MARTA. We had a affordable housing policy that the board approved in 2010. The office of TOD wasn't actually established until 2013 at MARTA. And the land holdings that we have approximately 300 acres. When the system was built, because it was determined as a fairly rural, the Atlanta metro region is fairly rural relative to San Francisco, New York, Chicago, others, we were blessed to have additional land for parking. And so these land holdings now are what we use to achieve some of the goals that our jurisdictional partners like City of Atlanta and Fulton County and DeKalb County and Clayton County want to achieve in the affordable housing space. So similar to Atlanta Housing, we have projects in various different areas. We delivered 2 projects this year. King Memorial, TOD, which is 300 units, 100 of which are workforce housing units. And then we delivered another project at Edgewood Candler Station, which was 208 units, 52 of the units are affordable. Both of the affordable components could not have happened without the City of Atlanta. Invest Atlanta stepped up on both of those, and shout out to Amanda again for helping to put those deals together. But the gestation period is something to mention because the King Memorial TOD, the public request for proposal was done in 2012. And then the actual opening of the project was this February. So these projects take a long time in the public sector because of the requirements from a procurement perspective and the complexities of the ground leases, et cetera, et cetera. So everyone, is definitely, a heart is definitely there and getting the work done, but it's a lot of blocking and tackling. We do have H.E. Holmes, the master plan. The process is starting at that station. It's 22 acres. In DeKalb County, we have the Kensington station area, which is 34 acres, which is wrapping up its master plan before being rezoned and then ultimately going out to the development community. And then Indian Creek, which is 52 acres, is also just started master planning. So we're about 100 acres in master planning right now. We recently awarded the Bankhead Station TOD to Peoples Corporation and Donald Washington, Exact Capital, and Third and Urban. They have programmed 500 units, 30% of which are affordable. And we actually did the AMI calculation a little bit differently. We did 80 to 120% of the area median income by zip code. And the reason why we thought that was important is typically the AMI, for those of you, ignore me, for those of you who know this stuff, but usually it's by MSA, so it's Atlanta, Sandy Springs, Marietta, so it's a higher number. And so we wanted to be more intentional about the units we delivered in that particular neighborhood, which of course then creates enormous challenges from a capitalization perspective. So we're dealing with all those things. But we thought it was an important thing, and so did our board, to do those types of innovative things. The procurement for the Arts Center station is out in the development community right now. We did require, based on feedback from the City of Atlanta, that there needs to be an affordable housing component in that project. And so we're hopeful to have proposals on February 15th show up. We're still working through North Avenue. That's a small site. It's a 1.5 acre site. The original proposal that was selected by the MARTA board was 41 stories. But it was a office building with a hotel on top, which is great from an economic development perspective, but there was no housing component. So we're trying to figure out a way to include a housing component. And in a 41-story tower, costs get super expensive, and so trying to make the math work is really the challenge. Everyone has the will to make it happen, but really to get the math to work. But I love being part of the strike force. I'll just wrap up by saying, we have deals we're in negotiation with, but we're also working closely with Josh and Terry and looking for opportunities not only on the deals in front of us today, but also ways to partner going forward so that we can do great work together.
And are you feeling more hopeful?
Is that to me?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. No, I think the mayor's leadership has been fantastic in getting all of us together. I mean, we've had calls separately with Dan and his team to understand the intersections between transit and education. We've had separate conversations in GIS mapping of APS, of Atlanta Housing, and how we're helping out with the Bowen Choice Grant and trying to create a narrative of how transportation helps the lives of the people for Bowen Homes and the future redevelopment of Bowen Homes. So I think the collaboration and the fact that, I would consider these people my friends, right? Because we're on the phone all the time, trying to solve problems in the trenches.
So would you say, with all this cooperation and we all friends, and would we expect it to take less than 10 years to get a deal done going forward?
Wow. Is that to me?
Huh?
Is that to me?
Well, you're the one who gave me the 10-year number.
So I think that's.
And quickly, because I got to get to Dan. Yes.
So I'm going to use one other example of a story that's taken a long time that has moved with a sense of urgency since this mayor took office and the strike force launched. You might be familiar with 143 Alabama or the Constitution Building. That an RFP went out when Kasim Reed was still mayor of Atlanta, and it's been stuck for a whole bunch of very complicated reasons around land ownership and air rights and MARTA easements and all the like. The work of this strike force has pulled together Invest Atlanta, MARTA, and the city to find a way forward on that project, and we are moving forward with haste and have resurrected that project for the first time in several years to really move it forward. And so I think that's what I'm most hopeful about, is that it won't take 10 years for the next project to happen. That the work of this group together, and really the mayor working to reorient city departments, whether we're talking about permitting or the way that we finance and fund deals and everything in between, to make that all work better, because we understand the sense of urgency. We understand we don't have 10 years to wait.
Good. Dan, all these ladies and gentlemen calling you all the time. You must have some land over there at the school board. And I know I was personally involved some years ago. We actually did an inventory of land. So tell us where we are with the Atlanta Public School System.
Sure. Thanks, Bill. APS in the past 3 years has undertaken a facilities master plan, and we had Sizemore and Blakely Advisory Group, who were part of that. And that looked at what facilities that we need over the next 10 years out to 2030. Why am I bringing this up? Is because one component of that is we have 47 what we call potentially access properties. These are properties that are old schools or just pieces of property that are out there. And we had our consultants do a review of the 47 potential access properties, and we have to go beyond more than 10 years or 8 years to out to 2030. So we went out to 2050 with their crystal balls and made some recommendations. And we're now down where this past Monday we brought to the board of the Atlanta Board of Education our first read of 16 properties that we are looking for them to declare surplus. And declaring it surplus just means that we will at that point be able to either look for some either type of sale, disposal, or even some type of long-term lease opportunities for these excess properties. Also, last month, the Board of Education, we had a board retreat talking specifically about these excess properties. And we did an exercise where our engagement group polled the board in the meeting, did an exercise to find what are the top 3 priorities that we'd like to see for these properties. And one of the priorities that came up of the top 3, and they're all kind of all grouped together, one of them was affordable housing. I was looking for affordable housing opportunities. The other one is early learning center, and then the last one is community resources for arts and nonprofits. So the Atlanta Board of Education, the Atlanta Public Schools, we are part of the strike force. We do see our role, and I will say the impact of the lack of affordable housing has a huge impact on Atlanta Public Schools. The fact that we've had, over the last 10 years, almost 80,000 increase in population within the city of Atlanta, but our enrollment's been flat, is a testimony to the erosion of the affordable housing, let alone the number of students that have to transfer from one school to the other, and now whole student mobility and the impact on the student achievement as well.
So your board, if I'm hearing you correctly, actually sees a connection between affordable housing, growing the school system, kids have availability.
Yes, I mean, and they've seen that back, this board and prior boards, back to the 2017 school year, they developed their of the Atlanta Housing Task Force, the Atlanta Public Schools Housing Task Force. And so it's just been a key part that they're looking, our HR department keeps coming to me and saying, how can we get housing, affordable housing for our teachers? What type of partnerships can we create? So it's across multiple departments within Atlanta Public Schools.
Good. Sure, quickly, and I'm going to open it up for some questions.
I was thinking about the question you said about being hopeful, and I am hopeful, but I don't want us to leave here thinking that there are not challenges. Because when I think about our portfolio just with Atlanta Housing, we you know, we're redeveloping some sites that have been vacant for probably over 10 to 15, maybe even 20 years. And those sites have a huge need for infrastructure improvements. And so we've estimated, based upon some transactions that we move forward with, that it's about a $1.1 million need for infrastructure per acre, right? So that's the cost, $1.1 million. And so when we redeveloped the Hope 6 projects, the majority of the infrastructure funding that Atlanta Housing was able to receive came through either City of Atlanta bonds, quality of life bonds, water sewer bonds, or the TADs. Those sources aren't necessarily there. And so as we move forward with redeveloping our vacant land resources, we've been working along with Josh and others to figure out how can we get creative to fill that infrastructure gap. Because without the funding to do infrastructure, that's what will slow us down.
Yep.
And will take us to 10 years. And so I just wanted to be, I'm very hopeful, but I also want to be transparent and honest about one of the challenges that's before us.
Yeah, well, since we started meeting way back at the food bank in the 80s, we have to put our hope in parentheses. But it does feel like there's greater cooperation, collaboration. A question from our online audience, from Lorraine Fontana. The definition of affordable housing is key. What does affordable housing mean to each of your agencies?
So I think for me, before I even talk about our agency, affordable housing at the end of the day is what housing costs versus what people make. And we recognize that what's affordable to one may not be affordable to others. So affordability is relative. From a program perspective, because the majority of our funding comes from HUD, we're restricted to provide our funding to families and individuals that are at 80% of the median of the AMI for the MSA. And I think that's important to note. Now, I will tell you that about 91% of the families that we serve on an annual basis, and we serve about 26,000 households, are what we classify as extremely and very low income. And so we're being very intentional about trying to hit the lowest of the spectrum. We've also received challenges on our development activities to try to hit the lowest of the spectrum in that as well. So, but again, affordability is relative.
Okay. Dan, I know you mentioned we realize a lot of school teachers have to live far away. How do we get them? What would be the definition?
Yeah, I will say, you know, we're in the nation stage of the very early stages of looking at affordable housing and that, and would have to yield to our partners, Atlanta Housing and the City of Atlanta, as far as that definition. So we're just starting that part.
Wouldn't be hard to figure out what you're paying teachers and what they can afford.
Correct.
That's not a hard thing to figure out.
Obviously, we would want it to, so that our staff would be able to be affording it, yes.
Excellent. Jacob?
Yeah, our affordable housing board policy is 60 to 80% of the area median income for rental, but the workforce housing conversation is getting much louder. I had to deliver a sort of study to our chief of staff on Friday because we do have employees that are actually living in their cars for various hardship reasons. So we have immediate needs for folks, and then sometimes our bus and train operators, as well as MPD, MARTA Police Department, make in excess of this 60 to 80% AMI. So we're trying to think through how, it's different strategies, short-term, medium-term, and long-term, and potentially, even having, development on our land for our own workforce.
Right.
So we're trying to think through all those things. But yeah, so generally our board policy is 60 to 80% of AMI.
Good. Josh?
I think fundamentally we've got a broken housing market, right? And so we need housing across the
Every
board.
level.
We need market rate luxury housing because you got folks move into the city that can afford and want that housing. We need enough housing at that level to meet that demand. We need housing for bus drivers and teachers and everywhere in between, and we're not creating enough of that housing, and then we're not creating enough of the very low income housing that Terry's talking about. And so I think for us, really neighborhood by neighborhood across the city, having enough diversity of housing stock where you're meeting folks that are at 30% of the median income and 50, 60, 70% of the median income, and then have enough market rate so that the folks that are moving in the neighborhood aren't cannibalizing any of the naturally moderate housing affordability
Right.
that exists there. And so that's maybe a little bit of a non-answer to the question, but I do think we need it all. Like, there's the numerator problem. We talk a lot about the 20,000 housing units. It's obviously an important goal for us to hit. But if we don't hit the denominator, if we don't create enough housing supply that's varied across the market, then we're going to be sitting here 10 years from now, 20 years from now, having the exact same conversation because we're not fixing the fundamentals of the market.
Well, exactly, and it comes back to how we frame the issue, because otherwise they usually put us off in the corner and say, when we get this done, we'll get to you. So we're all at the table now. Let me open it up for any questions. Yes. Nana?
Hi, thank y'all for talking.
And you are?
Lindsay Siegel from Land Legal Aid. So I've been talking to a number of you, including Josh, about the fact that voucher recipients in the city of Atlanta are unable to use their vouchers because so many landlords refuse to accept them. I was very happy to see that City Council, just before Thanksgiving, passed a resolution that would require any developers and landlords accepting city money to allow voucher holders to live in their properties. I'm curious how that's going to impact, practically speaking, the work that you are doing on the strike force. How's that going to change the deals that you do with developers and landlords? Or will it?
I'll talk kind of high level about it, and if y'all have thoughts on how.
Sounds like you guys already had this
I think-
conversation. Maybe let us in on
So
it.
I think that one of the things that for us, and I know Councilmember Bakhtiari, who took the charge on that work and worked really with all the different agencies to kind of get everyone on the same page. And Stephen Davis was here earlier, but the Apartment Association worked with us as well to find a way, a policy that could move forward and advance the housing voucher issue. I think that what that legislation did, and following kind of boards buy-in from each of the different agencies, is say, hey, like, if you're going to do business with a public agency in the city, then at a minimum, when somebody comes to you and wants to use vouchers as a source of housing choice vouchers as a source of income, you have to accept that. You can't turn that away. Now, I think as far as the fundamentals of the deal, I don't know that it changes them all that much. I think it really is more around saying, like, the minimum, like, if you are doing a deal with the city, then somebody comes to you and applies for vouchers, you accept that. And I think that, and Terry may have other thoughts on, like, the mechanics of that, but I don't see how it would fundamentally change the deals themselves.
Yeah, because it's not project-based vouchers, I don't think it changes the deal, the financial transactions of the deal. But what it does do is open up and increase the opportunity and availability of housing supply for voucher participants. So right now, we have about probably close to 11 or 12,000 of our vouchers that are issued go to persons who have individual vouchers, so tenant-based vouchers. And so what we want to make sure of is that those voucher participants have housing choice and are able to go in areas of the city that are also close to amenities, close to schools, and close to networks. And so I think it just opens up the opportunity and the availability of additional housing supply. And I will tell you, we're working with the Apartment Association to demystify vouchers, right? Because I think there are a lot of misconception about what a voucher actually is. We're also working to better understand how our process impacts the private market. Because what we have heard from landlords is that they don't want voucher participants because it takes too long to get through the process with Atlanta Housing from an inspection standpoint. So we're listening, we're hearing, we're talking to understand what we can do, but now in some cases, we just need cooperation, right? And we need everybody to step to the table and be willing to do their fair share and their fair part.
Here, here. Yes, in the back. Let's go here first. Now, I'm sorry. I'm going to get to both of you.
Richard Taylor, Art Capital. I'm a developer, affordable housing provider, and we accept vouchers through Open Doors, who's been a great partner for permanent supportive housing. And one of the big things that I've seen that's been a point of contention is that in the neighborhood that we're in, which is Hunter Hills, I know for a fact there are people, legacy residents there experiencing homelessness, and I would love to kind of prevent them from being displaced and essentially kicked out of that neighborhood due to gentrification. However, there's no sort of mechanism that I could use through the city to essentially get them into Open Doors, Home First, into those voucher programs, and then beyond that, fast-tracked to the front of the line to get them in, units that I have available. Have you guys experienced that, thought about that, or have anything on the docket that might support that?
So I'll let Terry answer the fast track question, but as far as the basic question, I mean, we want to support from a collaboration and just like flow of communication standpoint. And you could start with me. Catherine Vassal, who leads Partners for Home, is also really a good entry point, and I can introduce you to her. We do have an ecosystem, and then the mayor is very serious about addressing those that are unhoused and creating more permanently supportive housing and wraparound services for that community. If you have individuals that are interested in that work or otherwise, please work with Catherine if you know her. If not, I'm happy to, like I said, to connect you. And then as far as the connection in front of the line stuff, I do think there's some stuff around vouchers that wait list wise. I don't know if that necessarily is an option, but there are a lot of resources, and we're expanding our permanent supportive housing services throughout the city. And the more we expand those, the more availability I think for these types of situations would show up.
Yeah, so I don't, the word fast track makes me a little nervous because it's almost like moving somebody above somebody else when you all have a need, correct? And so I think the best thing to do would be to start the point, and I'll be more than willing to sit down and meet with you as well, but I believe Catherine Vassal is really probably the best point of contact to just kind of talk through this conversation because she does a wonderful job with Partners for Home. We actually allocate a little over 1,200 vouchers to Partners for Home to assist in homelessness, and so that may be the best point to start and just to be able to get the individuals within the system.
One thing about those 1,200 vouchers too is that it includes wraparound services. So it's not just a traditional voucher, but the part of the supportive housing is the wraparound services that can ensure the folks that get into the system really get the support they need in order to be successful.
Yeah, and I just want to clarify, all 1,200 are not available, right? Because she does have individuals that are currently in use. But we do have an annual allocation that we keep with just a running allocation. So of that 1,200, when a voucher becomes available, we don't take it back into our pool. We let it stay with Partners for Home in order to make available for the next homeless, to support the next homeless individual or family.
Good question. Right here.
So I just had a question.
And you
I'm
are?
sorry, I'm Maureen Freehill with National Church Residences. We are a developer. We're the largest nonprofit developer of senior affordable housing in the country. And something that I wanted to kind of pick your brains about is something that we experience. We take vouchers, we use federal funds, we do all those things, but something we're coming up against as we're trying to work through these deals is the limitations on contractors that are capable or willing to work with Davis-Bacon wages, which are required of all the programs you're talking about, right? So it's important, and living wages are important, and prevailing wages are important. So what are y'all doing to increase the pool of contractors? Because there's just so many people out there that we can work with to get these deals done. So what are y'all doing to work with contractors to increase that pool so that there are more developers like us that can avail ourselves of those programs?
Sounds like a 30-minute answer on that one, so I'm
Yeah, it is
Go
a
ahead.
30-minute answer. The long and short of it is, I would say we work with our procurement department. If you would like, I can give you information to our procurement chief, Albert Morello, and he can help you with that. But I will say, we follow Davis-Bacon. And if if the developer is not following Davis-Bacon, we will not pay for that activity that's been completed. Because it's absolute a federal requirement, and quite honestly, it's the right thing to do.
Amen.
Okay, Jacob,
Just-
you were
Well, one quick thing on it too. I mean, I think this gets back to the 10-year question that you were asking, right? Public land historically been very complicated. What we're trying to do is to clear as much of that complication ahead of going to RFP, ahead of bringing in a development partner, because we know there are other complications that are going to come up, whether it's Davis-Bacon, or everyone could give me a list of things that are most complicated. So as much as we can check those things off, Davis-Bacon's not something we necessarily have flexibility on, but as we check those off, then I think it can open up the pool and make working on public land much more appealing than maybe it is in some situations.
Okay. And Jacob, did you want to?
No, I just said amen to the Davis-Bacon. That's a tough one.
All right. In the end, okay, one more right here.
Good morning. My name is Natalie Jerome. I'm a realtor with Keller Williams. A question that came to mind is once the folks that are in the affordable housing units get in and their income changes, is there any oversight for that? Just curious if there's a flow so that, you know, once individuals are in a position to get in a higher income bracket, if there are opportunities for people who aren't able to get a voucher because, you know, the wait list can be extensive, you know, is there a way to make sure that there's a flow of individuals that can get in where other people, you know, used it and, you know, now they're able to move
Got
on?
it. But that's kind of keeping it going. When you win the lottery, you're mostly going to move out on your own, but.
That's right. And
yeah.
I think you basically answered the question, right? Because we have a wait list of participants. So as a voucher becomes available, you know, we actually go to that wait list to identify individuals. Now, if someone is in in one of our units that's subsidized by what we either call our Housing Choice Voucher Program or our Home Flex program, if they become over income during the annual recertification process, we will give them a grace period, but we do have to transition them off the program because we are following the federal guidelines and requirements.
And that varies program to program, right? So like inclusionary zoning, for instance, that we have a certain AMI kind of circuit breaker cap. Like if you come in at 80% AMI, I can't remember if it's 120 or 140 off the top of my head, but you can recertify up to a certain, like, so that there's a level for economic mobility, but if you get to a certain point, then you have to phase out of the program.
So I think we're all feeling positive and hopeful that we're communicating, we're cooperating with each other, we're trying to get out of our silos. Do you think this idea can work around the region? I mean, any of you getting calls from around the region saying how's it? Because you're really talking about changing a culture, right, of our attitudes about how we're going to get it done. Is this something we'd look to around the region?
I'll say, you know, we're participating in a national cohort with 6 other cities. And I think that not only around the region, I think this can work around the country. This type of, I mean, some of this is, I mean, Jacob called it blocking and tackling, right? Like some of it's the collaboration of getting the groups together.
Yeah.
The question I would have, and I think that would depend on municipality to municipality. I won't say that 2 times twice again. Is what is your underutilized resource? For us, it happens to be that we have a lot of underutilized land. In areas where that is also true, I think this could definitely work.
Okay, all right. So let me, I want to end this part of the session. Again, I think it's important to kind of say, what did we hear? Blocking and tackling. Blocking and tackling. Josh and I have gotten to be good friends around blocking and because I call him up and say, why? Well, we're blocking and tackling over here, so it really gets to the details. There's got to be trust and cooperation, and you only get that by working together, being there for each other. So trust is key to building a culture. There's got to be an urgency, and we're feeling, I think, a new urgency that we haven't felt before. There's got to be leadership. Matt Westmoreland is a great example. You know, he was doing that before we had the mayor that we have to make it a top commitment. So leadership, I think, is a key. And then finally, I would say we need to support the folks that are doing the blocking and tackling, the people that are making the policies and taking the arrows and, you know, getting hollered at about things. So it really is, and to Elizabeth's point, we really need to look at the legislation that would enable that. Please thank this panel for us and the work that they do every day. I want to do some quick thank yous, certainly to St. Luke's Episcopal Church, which hosts us. Again, this is a place I began my ministry in 1975. So St. Luke's has been there, continues to be there for us, and provides, I think, a great place for us to meet. I want to point out Matt Brandon and Wes, who is handling the sound systems and the PowerPoints. They're working. Thank you, guys. Give them a hand. I want to thank our advisory committee that talks a lot between meetings. Bruce Gunner, James Alexander from Mercy Housing, Candace Mitchell, I think I saw Candace here earlier from Enterprise, George Bergen, Sam Shimbaga from ARC, and Natalie Kaiser from House ATL. Their names are up here. A lot of work goes on between meetings to figure out how and what and who's going to be our speakers. I want to thank the Arthur M. Blank Family Foundation, who's been giving us a small grant for some of the expenses that we had. And I've always got to say, thank God for George Bergen, who is our producer and gets this done. George, all right. All right, let me say some final words. I want to say something about the environment that we find ourselves in. One of the teachers that I have learned from is a gentleman named John Powell. And if you don't know John Powell, I would encourage you to get to know him. He's the founder and the CEO of the Othering and Belonging Institute at the University of California. One of the things that John talks about is how society, each of us, processes change. We have an inherent need to belong to a tribe of our choosing, often the tribe we're born into. But as societies grow, we are challenged to embrace change, often change that we can't control and have little influence over. There's a tendency, when change comes too fast, to say the problem is the others. That's really the basis of NIMBY, isn't it? We're afraid of the others that we don't know. And that comes, I think, out of, and I really encourage you can see videos and books that John has written about how that plays a role in our society, particularly now. The Housing Forum was convened and facilitated as a regional conversation over 30 years ago. We've seen the ups and downs of the market, as well as the good and bad leadership by politicians and policymakers. With our population growing, we are challenged in how we create greater diversity and affordability in our own neighborhoods. A lot of us fear that change and want to go back to some idealized time when we didn't feel that anxiety. Not sure it ever existed, but we have it in our mind that we would like to go back. Oftentimes, that comes because we feel threatened. It's hard for a region or any region of our state to diversify and retrofit a community. We know that as we try to retrofit an area around transportation. You know, it's a fight for every station. It's a fight for where we would put the next light rail line. With so much change, it's hard to know where to build our schools, our hospitals, our highways, and our transit options. It's hard for policymakers to move forward when there is so much noise and anger in the system. That is why we need to support each other. We need to support our politicians and policymakers. We need to support the police and the teachers and the healthcare workers. We need to support small businesses and entrepreneurs who often invest in transitioning neighborhoods. We need to make our views known at the state capitol and at local jurisdictions. We need to be more compassionate toward each other. At the end of the day, providing clean, safe, affordable housing is a moral issue. It will define us as a great city and region that is faced with challenges with courage, boldness, and compassion. So I thank all of you for being here today, for supporting each other, for being willing to listen to each other out, because when we feel threatened, we often get cynical. Cynicism paralyzes us. So the opposite of cynicism is not optimism, it's action. And I feel like we're in a moment that we've never been in before. We've got leadership, we've got great folks working, doing the blocking, tackling, and we have each of us who are here to support it. Thank you all. Happy holidays to everybody, and we'll see each other in the new year. Be safe.